Let's change pace here. We're going to talk about action filters. So I mentioned this before, that action filters are a way of having cross-cutting logic. So when I use the word cross-cutting, it's a lot like what you've heard with aspects, but the basic idea is like if you want to log, the begin and end of every action method, or if you wanted to time, these methods, or if you want to do authorization. These are concerns that your main action method shouldn't be responsible for. So you write an action filter, and that action filter will run before and can run after each action method and do all these other types of activities. And the key benefit of making it cross-cutting or orthogonal to your action method is that when you write your action method, it shouldn't have to know, when you write your action filters or apply your action filters, the action filters shouldn't be dependent on the logic that's in the action method, and vice versa, as much as possible, because you want these things to be independent. And that will make it a lot more maintainable. Now, we include a small set of action filters, a very small set. We have handle error, which is used to handle an error. And we also have the authorization filter, which I think is just called authorize. And that determines that the user must be a member of a role or must be authenticated to call that action method. But for the most part, filters are there for you to write your own filters that do things that are important to your application. Now, one of the things we added in MVC 3 is a concept called filter providers. And earlier I mentioned that there were only 2, but there are actually 3. I'd forgotten one. And so the default filter provider is the attribute-based provider. So that's the one that mimics the behavior you had in MVC 2. Then we have just a generic filter provider, which is any instance that's added to it will get run on every request. And then we have one that's called the controller instance provider. Because one thing that I tend to forget even is that controllers themselves are implemented as action filters. So there's in your controller, you can have an on-action executing and on-action executed method call. And one happens before and one happens afterwards. So the neat thing about filter providers, though, is that we call the dependency resolver and we call the get all instances or get services on that. I tend to forget even is that controllers themselves are implemented as action filters. The other thing we support, because as I mentioned before, one of those filter providers is this default global filter provider. So you can supply global action filters simply by instantiating your action filter and passing them into the filter providers. So one of the things you've seen in global ACAX is that we actually register handle error attribute in that manner. So the nice thing about this is that you can use attributes without having to put in filters, without having to put an attribute on every class or method. And filters can, because of the filter providers, you can write providers that allow you to do things like run a filter for everything, run for just the actions, and run a filter if certain conditions apply. So a classic example of that is a filter that only runs when you're in debug mode. That could be a really useful filter to write, or filter provider, I should say. So to demonstrate global filters, Drew's going to do that again.
Cool. All right, so because you loved my message service so well, I think you're really going to like this scenario. So let me explain. So what we're going to do is we're going to just quickly run the application. And you're going to see that it is a very nice and polished site that tells you how many number of visits occur, right?
Wow.
And as I refresh, the number will eventually go up. Right now, it does not. And what we have is a very complicated set of business logic, which increases the counter and keeps it in a very well-designed...
Un momento. Can you scroll back up, please, to the top? So you needed all of that, the copyright disclaimer,
There's more.
for that little bit of code?
Yeah, exactly. There's more comment in this thing, too, yeah. Which is always a good sign.
This is very, very, high-class software, so we got to make sure that you know what it is. Yeah.
Yep. Because just in case you decide to make a derivative work and we open source this, and you never know. This could be like the next .NET nuke right here. Let's start. All right. So what we need to do is actually increase that counter, and we're going to do that through a filter on one of our controllers. And so let's go ahead and add a new filter, and we'll call it the counter filter attribute. No, we'll just call it counter attribute. Keep it simple. And then we'll inherit from action filter attribute, bring in that namespace, and then we'll override a method called onResult executing. And when does this actually execute?
So that onResult executing runs after your action method has returned us a result. So your action method is done, but before we actually execute that result.
Okay. And so here's where I'm going to bring in my lovely count service, counters, and go ahead and increase that home counter. That will probably take a few seconds to execute, and then we'll come back and continue on.
On your machine, maybe.
Yes, absolutely, if it doesn't blue screen. All right. So now we're going to actually apply that in the way that we've done in the past. So we'll actually go to the controller, and go to home controller, find our index method, and just go ahead and use that counter. And so we'll bring that in. And now it's applied to the index method. And so we'll run this. And this is what you could do in MVC2 as well, right? And so now as I refresh, you'll see that that number goes up. But if I go over to my other action here, the about action, and render that view, you see the counter does not go up right now, okay? So one way that I could obviously fix that is I could just go and apply the counter attribute to every action method that I have, right?
Or to the controller.
Or to the controller itself. But I would have to, again, do it to every controller that I wanted it to count for, right? So this new great feature that you probably came up with and invented and wrote and coded, totally. Like it's just you over there, right?
Yeah, it's just me.
Yeah, okay. That's what I thought.
Actually, I don't write any of the code.
Well, join my camp. I don't write, no, just, let's see. What do I have to do?
I write demos.
Demos?
Yeah, that's
yeah,
what
we're
I
good
write.
at writing demos.
Yeah.
All right, so focus.
Yeah.
We must focus. All right. So we're actually going to add this then. This is what you were talking about where you can actually register global filters, right?
Correct.
And so I'm just going to go ahead and add my new counter attribute. Bring that in that namespace and run that again. And now it's added as a global filter, and so it'll just automatically take effect on this page. So we can just keep on going. It's actually really fast.
Yeah, it's
I mean,
good
it
code.
counts quick. Look at that. I mean, it's
Great.
awesome. So that was awesome, wasn't it?
Yeah. So one other thing, let's go back to your counter attribute.
Sure.
So you notice that he implemented action filter attribute. And in part, that makes sure that it works in the old way of applying it onto an action method. But let's say you don't care about that. You only want it to run, it's only going to be a global one, let's say. So let's actually change that to be I action filter.
Okay.
You might need to try expanding I action filter. You might need to implement.
Implement the whole interface.
Yeah.
Okay.
And so.
And then, of course, we don't have a base anymore.
Yeah. So get rid of that line.
Just can't type today. All right.
Oh, you know what? I result filter. Sorry, you're doing this on the result. So.
Okay.
So this is something that a lot of people ask us, is that they wanted to be able to have tighter, fine-grained control, and I said, I don't want it to be an attribute. I just want to implement an interface and have it work. And so that's one of the things that we did with MVC3 is that his class, since he's not using it as an attribute, all he needs to do is implement this interface, and it'll work. So let's prove that it works, because nobody's going to believe my word for it.
No? Oh, there you go.
goes.
You are trustworthy.
Great.
This time. Cool.
So that was global action filters. The next thing we'll talk about is advanced validation. And so MVC3 takes advantage of system.componentModel.data annotations, or what I generally call data annotations. And these are attributes that are built into the core .NET framework. So the key thing to keep in mind is that most of these attributes are not MVC specific, but they're actually used with dynamic data. And if you're familiar with RIA services, which is part of the Silverlight stack, these are the same attributes.